start, let's start because it's 3 minutes past 2. Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. As I said at the beginning, we're going to be talking through our findings from the Swoop Analytics 2023 to 24 Viva Engage Benchmarking Report. So some really great insights have come out of that. So taking you through the call today, so we're luckily enough today to be joined by a few swoopers. So you've got myself, I work alongside Pete and Nicole, but I actually cover North America. Pete on the call covers Europe alongside Nicole. We've also got Matt on the call. So Matt is in Leicester, but from Australia, Perth, but he's over in the UK visiting. We've got Serena joining us. She's our events manager, and I think Serena's in Vietnam at the moment. So well covered today. And then I work alongside with my colleague Coco, but Coco's actually based on the West Coast in Redmond, Washington, so it's a bit early for her. So I cover the East Coast hours. So if you haven't already done so, I'm just going to leave this screen up here, and you've got the QR code where you can just, if you can get your phone out, take a snapshot of that, and then it will give you a link to the Viva Engage Benchmarking Report. This is what today's briefing is focusing on. So if you haven't had a read, I would definitely recommend bedtime reading. So I'm just going to leave that up while you can get a chance to download it. And then we will start. So a little bit about today, okay? So this is our 9th annual report. So we have now been doing this for a very long time, and we're always seeing completely different insights. So for this year's benchmarking report, we looked at more than 23 million Viva Engage interactions, the behaviours of almost 5 million employees, over nearly 5,000 regularly active Viva communities, and 97 organisations. And now our organisations are ranked on sizes. I'll go into that in a bit more detail as we go through, but we've got some very well-known brands and some smaller. So across the board, you know, we've got a great number of organisations that we can analyse. So our first finding, okay. So something that I think you're probably on this call, you might hear a lot, is nobody uses Viva Engage, my social network, AMER. But we actually found from our findings that 85% are reading posts on Viva Engage, which is a huge captivated audience. Okay, so I think what we're seeing here is that we are seeing that people are going in, using Viva Engage, but there's 85% are reading, but there's only 27% interacting, posting, commenting and reacting. So even though you've got this 85% reading, so a really great audience, we've only seen that there's 27% interacting, okay? But I actually think Pete and I and Nicole were having a chat about this yesterday, so we will talk openly about why we think this is happening, but absolutely please jump in and let us know your experiences as well, okay? So huge audience of 85%. Big opportunity here is the 58% of the people that are reading but not interacting, okay? So you've got 27% of interactive people, 85% of people are reading, but you've got this 58% that are probably, they're more of the observers. So they're in the background, they might be looking, but they're just not joining in on those amazing conversations that are happening on a social network.
Can I just jump in, Jem? Because I think it'd be really cool to get a sense of these two closely related first two insights. So 85% of an organisation is actually reading Viva Engage, but then only 27% being interactive. I'd love to hear, whether in the chat or if someone's happy to come off mute and share your thoughts in your organisation. Does that sound like your organisation? Do you think does that surprise you to see that the data from this massive study shows that 85% of people are reading Viva Engage? Is that a surprise to you, or is it something that, yeah, that sounds about right for your organisation? Has anyone got any thoughts on that? I feel like I want to do, for those in the UK who might be old enough to remember Bruce Forsyth and Play Your Cards Right, wasn't it? Where it was higher, higher, lower, lower. I'm sort of going...
I'll jump in. I mean, these numbers match ours. However, my slice is 90 days. If I slice it at 90 days, I'm getting these similar numbers. But when I slice it at 30 days, I'm way lower. I'm like 14% are playing out content. But when I slice it at 90 days, I match these numbers. So we're still working on our adoption rates.
Interesting. Yeah, and then that sort of feeds into, oh, now we're getting jumping, oh, you've tapped straight into my analytics nerd, because now it's like these shifting parameters and the sort of shape of the data that you're looking at can tell very different stories, right? So for you then, just for those who might not be as experienced with slicing and dicing and analyzing the data in detail there, what does that tell you when you say you're looking at adoption? Why is that something that you infer from the difference between 30 days and 90 days?
Well, I mean, we've got, so our company's about 7,000 employees, maybe around 6,000 employees. And we're not getting a lot of people reading our articles. So we're getting more people coming over to AMER to read stuff. My focus has been trying to get our leaders on board. And unfortunately, I was hoping to kind of do a top-down type of approach. Just go to the top guy and say, make all your leaders use it, and it's not working. So I'm trying to do bottom up, and it's just much slower going. But I know that the adoptions go so much quicker once my leaders get on there, and the adoption has been slow. Fortunately, and I don't want to monopolize this call, but fortunately, we do an annual survey about how people like their job, and we just come out with our new survey, and some numbers are kind of low about people feeling like they belong here. So that kind of helps me. It's like, now I got a tool that's going to help with that. I've got a tool that's going to help people feel like they have a sense of belonging, that can bring people together with this tool. So those low score in that survey are kind of good, kind of helping me do my job.
Sorry. I was just going to jump in. I just saw a really interesting comment that caught my eye. Is it from Shiji? Really surprised with the percentage of colleagues interactive. What surprises you about that? Is it higher or lower than you thought it would be? So with 27%, so 85% reading and 27% interacting. The chat's moved on now, but I think it was.
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
Hi there. I'm so sorry. I'm actually, I just have last minute thing to do, so I'm not on my screen, but I'm listening through my mobile. And I thought to just put that quick message, because the 85% people reading is no surprise. So we get around the same numbers, but are people using Viva Engage to type a post or put a comment or react is way below that 27% mark.
Right.
So we're on the call to just listen to different ideas and see what we can do to bring that numbers up a little.
Interesting. Yeah. So here where we're saying there's 58% of people in our data set that are reading but not interactive, you're probably looking at maybe, I don't know, 70%, 75%, something like that, maybe a little higher. I don't want to put you on the spot to reveal the actual numbers, but big challenge, right? But big opportunity. So
I think we
what?
I think
I'm on a webinar. I'm just watching the webinar again from a different audience.
I think we need to look at the numbers as a development. You have started somewhere, probably at 0, and you're heading somewhere, and probably 90%. My experience is it takes 5 years to get to 90%. I think the active side is the only one that's interesting, because the other one is a kind of passive. If it's interesting, people read, right? But you want people to interact. But the learning process on the people side is they have to learn, they have impact, and that is something that comes with time. And as there is more impact or more visible impact, there are more people to participate actively.
it's culture ultimately, isn't it, that creates the space for people to respond and engage.
It's
And
culture.
culture takes time.
Takes time. It's culture from different sides. It's not only employees, it's also management who need to get used to this and need to give room to people to have impact on their day-to-day working life. So I think it's culture for the whole company.
Interesting.
So I think we're seeing a lot of comments in the chat, and this is exactly, so we were going through the findings as a team, and we were having very similar conversations to what's happening in the chat. So we know that we've got 85% people reading. We know that there's 27% of them active, and then we've got this opportunity with the 58%. We can see now with Viva Engage, the communities being used for broadcasting has increased, which I think is reflective of those numbers that we've seen. Okay, so I think now people may be seeing that Viva Engage, you've got a captivated audience of 85%. We're going to start using this more of a broadcast channel rather than that two-way knowledge sharing, building networks within a business. And that's where we saw the top for performing communities are still those conversational based communities. So again, if anyone's brave enough here, does anybody use a social network as a sort of another intranet to broadcast? Are you using it for your leaders to push out messages, or is it still very much that community based conversation led social network within a business? Is anyone brave enough to talk about how they use Viva Engage internally? Awkward silence.
There's comments in the chat.
Let's have a look.
Yeah. I know when I was on the other side of the fence as a community manager, it was always a case of we were fortunate to get that whole social and community peer-to-peer groups going before we got leadership involved. And I think sometimes there can be that desire to get leaders involved because it really does, I guess, give you that return on investment when you get your leaders engaged, but sometimes it can be at the expense of those social communities and those spaces where people can just practice. So that's where I think having a sort of strategy in place to sort of think, yes, we do want to encourage some of these social groups, and that we shouldn't avoid them, I think is really important.
I agree, absolutely agree. And I think sometimes you do see when you have that groundswell, that's when it really takes on like the opportunities are endless, I think, if you have those. And you know, I've spoken on many webinars for Swoop. You know, before I joined Swoop, I worked in internal communications. I was a channels manager, so I've been in this world for like 20 years. But I actually think the great thing about these channels, and I do talk about it a lot, is that you will get to meet people within the business that you would never, ever normally get to meet. And that's why I genuinely very passionate about tools like Viva Engage. And I think it is those community based. And I think if you create that safe environment, that safe space, people are open, they're willing to share their own stories. From an internal communications, digital workplace perspective as well, is that you can really uncover what's happening within the business, find out those great stories, find out where people do have pain points and help them. And I do think, Matt, like you just said, it is definitely, it's so important to have that leadership involvement to get them using it, but rather than probably having personas and getting them to just broadcast, push out what they're doing, posting on behalf of, if you can really get them to, you know, become on that level. And I think the things with tools like social networks is that it is a flat level, there's no hierarchy, and I think that's a great thing. So if we can just encourage, and I know it can take a lot to encourage your senior leaders. They feel like they don't have time, and we do other webinars on leading online and things like that. We have tons of tips on our website, but I do think if you can get to that community-based conversations, you know, the knowledge sharing, the networking, then that you can really see these communities thrive. Anything else to add, Pete or Matt? Sorry, Matt.
Oh, no, what I was going to say, I did see that both Deborah and there was someone else who had their hand up earlier. They've taken it down because we were probably moved on, but if they wanted to come off mute just and fire in.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. So I'm Deborah, I'm Network Rail. We've had AMER, as it was, and Viva Engage in use for about 9 years now, and it's very much embedded, but we have had a big problem in the last couple of years due to industrial action. And as you say, it's a really good window into looking at your workplace and what the problems are. We just had a few too many. But in terms of the top performing communities versus the ones for broadcasting, we've got communities about our top 3 communities are all what we call feel-good communities. They've got literally nothing, almost nothing to do with work, but they're for people to connect, and they're the best ones. So NR Pets, hands down, always a winner. Wildlife Watch, and Stunning and Interesting Railway Photography Stories, which is possibly the longest name of a community ever, but those are the ones which people go into because there's no danger in there, you know, and it's a place we're trying to get even our senior leaders on, because we have a slight problem with senior leaders on Viva Engage at the moment, but we've said you can't, it's a safe place because either you like pets or you don't, and you know, you can't be argued with. But the conversations that start in there, and people meeting you work in Aberdeen and you know, Plymouth, and it's brilliant. You know, our top performing communities are conversation based for sure.
Excellent. And I can see Peter's
another hand up. Jump on in.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts about this one. I think that it's really important when you work in internal comms to give equal weight to bottom up as it is to top down. I think if you balance those in your internal comms strategy, then you're onto a winner really. And I think when you talk about Viva Engage, then if you base your network around your corporate priorities and your strategic ways of working, then therefore, because all employees work to the same strategy, you should be able to work whatever you do in the organization. And so if the leaders can see there's a thriving network, then it's just a case to give them a bit of gentle persuasion to announce. And so that seems to work for us.
Excellent.
Yeah, nice. The other piece that I want to highlight, and particularly the mention of industrialized organizations, so heavy union presence. I worked actually the place where I would say I had most success with getting Viva Engage, or AMER as it was known at the time, adoption up was, it sounded a similar-ish environment, very different context, but a AMER instance that had been in place for 7 or so years and just bubbled away without any real intention behind it. And then we were able to really shift the leadership culture in the face of initially just complete 100% opposition to using AMER as a channel at all. Nobody wanted to do it. Everybody thought it was not going to work, and it had been there for ages. It had a bad reputation. And the fundamental thing, and the reason why I'm sitting here now working for Swoop, is because it was the data that allowed me to shift that mindset. And so I was able to use Swoop data to experiment, and where all I needed was I got one leader on board, I got one team on board, I got one department on board from this whole organization. And I used data and told the story of what I was trying to test and learn. And I got one person on board. And then that one person probably got 10 people on board because it was working for them, because they had the data, they were able to see it. And this is why, like, those of you who've suffered sitting near me or being on a meeting with me talking about Swoop and data, you understand why I'm so obsessed with it, because it's so powerful, particularly in the face of opposition. So all of you talking about getting leaders on board, you know, have you sat down with data and worked out what's appealing to a leader? What can you show them that is going to help them understand? And how can you show them how their behavior is having an impact? And with Swoop, you can absolutely do that. That sounds like a shameless plug, but it's genuine in the trenches. That's my experience. And we did some really impressive stuff in that organization around shifting the leadership communication culture in particular, but overall the sense of community and belonging and how people communicate, it can be done. So those of you that are on the call and saying, you know, you've been banging your head against brick walls for ages, perhaps, and you feel like you can't really get anywhere, do get in touch, because there are ways, especially if you get good, insightful data, that you can actually crack that nut and get your Viva Engage community past those hurdles. Can I just say as well, before I hand back the mic, thank you everyone for sharing so openly in the chat. It is fascinating seeing all of the chat there. And those that have come off mute to share your thoughts. It's hard to actually pay attention to the slides for me now because I'm just obsessed with the chat. But Gemma, back to you. Sorry.
No, that's fine. You carry on in the chat. You can help people in the chat. So the next slide. So during our 9 years of sweep benchmarking, this year a large size organisation ranked #1 in the world. So how we break it down, so our large size organisations, 8,000 or more employees, the medium's between 1,500 and 8,000, and then the small is between 100 and 1,500. So normally it's around the small medium, but it does show you that with that support, with time, that we are now seeing the larger size organisations getting in that top 1% of Viva Engage usage. There's a case study in the Viva Engage Benchmarking Report where you can find out about how they were using it within, so it's ANZ Bank in Australia. So you can find out more about how they used it and why they were ranked #1. But it just shows you, I think a lot of people probably think that Viva Engage social networks work well within that small to medium bracket, but actually these guys are using it and they were ranked #1. So great case study. We've got lots of case studies actually in the Viva Engage Benchmarking Report, and you'll be hearing from one of those case studies. We've actually got Paul on the call in a bit, so we'll introduce you to Paul, and hopefully Paul doesn't mind having a chat through about his community of Viva Engage. So we've got some positives and some negatives here that we just want to cover. So we know that more people are at mentioning. So we do know that people are now being brought into those conversations. The growth of something that Swoop does with data is that we look at the personas, okay? And so we've always said the best persona to be on Viva Engage is an engager. So they not only do they create engaging content, but they engage with others. So they create these great two-way relationships. And the catalyst personas we tend to see as, again, leaders. They'll start a conversation, but they might not go back and nurture those posts, okay? And then the responder, now I've always been a responder because I've always been a community manager, but we are seeing that more and more people are now responders on Viva Engage. And I think this goes back to probably that community-based focus, as in you're bringing more people into the conversation, and the responders are those helpful go-tos. So they're just making sure that they might not know the answer, but they don't want a post to go unanswered. So they're bringing the right people in and they're doing the matchmaking on Viva Engage. And we've actually got some blogs about the importance of community managers. I would absolutely recommend having a look at them, but you do need people to really drive these communities. And then we're seeing a lot more public communities. Now, I don't know if that's because of if you're using Viva Engage against other channels like Teams, so that's your private, and then your more open community. But that'd be quite interesting to hear if you encourage private groups on Viva Engage, or is it something that you say if it's private then work within Teams? I think it's definitely. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, were you asking if we're pushing private communities? Was that your question?
Yeah. Do you have private communities, Tim?
Yeah, we're pushing them for small organizations, the groups that we division directors that have like 100 people. We're suggesting they use that to bring their organization together. We've got 80 some communities, and I think 60 of them are public. But we're trying to get out the leaders to say, you've got a tool here where you can bring your group together to let them know what you're working on that week, what your goals are for the year, what's important to you, and then also what you're doing for the weekend. It's anything with it in between that, and it's been 50-50. Half of them are saying great idea, I'm in, and the other half need some more coaching.
Amazing. And Tim's actually speaking at our Viva Engage Festival next month. So if you want to hear more about what Tim's doing, then absolutely sign up. Yeah, definitely. I think Andrew, I saw Andrew put your hand up.
Hi, Gemma. Yeah, so
Hello.
we do. How are you? We do encourage people to use private communities as well. We think that if you have a small group that's working on a project, then maybe Teams is a good option. But when you get to a certain point and the number of people trying to work in a Teams environment, the constant messaging and different people talking, it becomes a bit too much. Whereas we encourage people, so it's great. Teams is great if you're working on very job-specific projects. But on the other hand, we like to use private communities for much larger groups. So we have certain job branches that the information that they talk about really might not be well mixed with other discussions happening in other places in Engage. So having those private communities is important to us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's it, isn't it? I think you all understand how your business works and what works well for you. But I would recommend that, to your point, is how are your channels going to work within your business. So just make people aware of where to go when they need that information. But definitely, I think I've always had a mixture of public and private communities, and some of even our employee-led more focused groups, some of them were private as well, and that's because the cohort decided they wanted to have that private community in an employee-led in an employee-led space. Anything else to add to that, Pete? Yeah, I was just gonna say it's just I think this is a really sort of easy to grasp example of how your digital culture is merely a reflection of your non-digital culture. You know,
Yep.
The organizational culture is set. That is what exists. Without any, if you stop putting any thought or effort into it, a culture exists within the organization, and a tool like Viva Engage gives you a window into that culture. I think it doesn't necessarily shift or change that culture. It's what you do with the tool that can then help nurture the culture in certain directions. And I do think there's an opportunity with this public versus private communities thing I've used it definitely successfully in the past to shift a lot of leaders' thinking around, I think of one CFO who had a really buzzing CFO division with, 500 or so people in his business area, had a buzzing Yammer community, it was at the time, but it was private. And this same CFO used to always complain how, to me, that people across all different areas of the business didn't understand how much value his division added, and no one was across the news and the things they were working on. And we had a really interesting conversation where he was saying, like, I've got this community private. He really understood the channel and the sort of philosophy of it. And so he was really conscious of having it as a private community where his people felt safe sharing and having this buzzing community. But I challenged him on that, saying, well, you've got this other selection of problems that are impacting on your capability of your business unit. You could go in many complex ways, such as sort of sharing a regular newsletter and doing news articles on the intranet, et cetera, doing road shows, whatever, to showcase the work you're doing. Or how about you just chat to your team and explain to them the rationale of why you want to make this community public? And in the end, that's what happened. The community went public. Suddenly, the rest of the organization was able to see inside this magician's trick of a community and go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was done by them, that was done by them. And it with zero effort other than changing an approach from private to public, they went a massive way to solving all of these communication challenges they had. And that leader was able to reflect and go, you know what, perhaps it's a maturity thing. And I kind of accepted this theorizing around it was, the initial stage, creating that safe space in the broader context of the organization was probably important. And then at an appropriate time, explaining to people and engaging them in the shift was really important, and then making it public. And then you're just getting a much more efficient and effective community environment, and it's part of an easier part of the ecosystem that people can feed into. So I think you can use this public-private thing as an opportunity to get people thinking more about public. And the way I used to phrase it was, the way I still phrase it is, you should make it your default to public. And there needs to be, if there's a reason that's really solid to go private, do it. But the default setting should be public. And it's a bit of a red flag to me if I was chatting to an organization and their default was private. I'd be saying, why? Aren't you all on a shared mission? Aren't you all trying to achieve the same kind of thing? So why are you shutting down conversation and collaboration across different silos? So that's my one. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. Pete, this is going to be your slide. Anyway.
Oh yeah, so we're sort of, those are the key insights really, and from the report, but it's not the conclusive, those are the only things you're going to see in the report, definitely not. So I'm sure many of you on this call have read the report. I'm sure many of you have got it on your desktop, you've maybe dipped into it, but it's well worth having a good read because there's a lot in there. And this really now is speaking to our award winners and how we actually look at and run a really detailed analysis of the performance within Viva Engage. So Dr. Lawrence Lockley, or Laurie as we call him, co-founder of Swoop and our chief scientist. This is an example of the kind of machinations that he does with the numbers. So he takes the Swoop reports and filters them up into these thriving community measures here. This is looking at his assessment of top performing or thriving communities within this data set. And you can see down at the bottom there, this is just to give you an example, down at the bottom there, some of the different Swoop metrics that he then filters into these different thematic areas around what makes a thriving community. And then from this, we're able to then create a list of the top performing communities in the world. And we'll come to that in a moment. But this is really just to give an example of how you can use data to build up really insightful perspectives on what does good look like, and what does high performing, what does thriving look like from a community perspective. So with Swoop, you could turn on Swoop tomorrow and you would be able to do this analysis of your network and see what are our most thriving communities, what are our least thriving communities. Within those communities, are there certain areas for improvement that we could look at? So you can start to see, when I talk about my obsession with insightful data, you think of something like this, applying this in your organization and taking a look at your top performing communities and your lower performing communities and building up action plans around how you can help those communities really go from maybe surviving through to thriving. There's a lot that can be done with insightful data. So yeah, it's again, I apologize for how enthusiastic I get about data. It's funny because I used to be, my background really is communication. I've then built my career into digital employee experience space. But I used to be very anti numbers, right? I used to be like, I'm creative, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call are coming from that similar background where it's like the thing that gets me my juices flowing is writing amazing copy and creating some amazing videos and doing great comms. And it was a sort of revelatory moment for me in my life when I was like, all these things where I've been trying to get people on board with my concepts and ideas, I'd been dismissing the ability for data to change people's minds. But actually, I'll correct myself on that. I don't think it's data that changes people's minds. It's the insight and the story that you can tell around that insight. And this is a good example of that with thriving communities. So we're taking all of these measures, and we're not just saying this community has performed highly in all of these metrics. It's about saying these communities are showing that they are thriving, and we can pinpoint why, and we can take lessons from that to apply to other communities. Do you want to skip to the next slide? Because another obsession of mine is this maturity level. And I know from the chat, there's a few of you who haven't launched Viva Engage yet. There's a few that have had it for quite a few years, and it's maybe just been sitting there sort of mothballing a little, and you want to get intentional. And there's some of you that have got really thriving networks full of thriving communities. But this maturity benchmark is such a useful tool, particularly when you want to have conversations with people who maybe are saying, they're a roadblock to you driving the success or nurturing more value from your Viva Engage network. I can't recommend this highly enough as something to discuss with your stakeholders. If you've got leaders who are maybe a bit interested, or maybe they're really anti Viva Engage, this is a great model to share with them, to sit down and say, okay, look, maybe where we are right now is down on the lower left-hand side there in that content piece, driving adoption, driving some basic user engagement. But if we put the effort in, we can get up to that top right, up at the higher levels of the model, where we're driving innovation, we're problem solving. And I think I saw Matt, I saw you nodding, you've used this before in conversations. Gemma, I'm sure you have, where it's about positioning the value of this channel, this tool, and this mentality of having a much more open organization where you can be problem solving and innovating and building these two-way relationships. And particularly I found this useful. One of the red flags I used to have, or it was probably actually a green flag, because I would see it as a big opportunity, was when a leader said to me, oh, Viva Engage isn't for me. That's just social. That's cat pictures and cookery and fun stuff. And I would go, oh, okay, you've clearly not looked at it lately, would be my first thought, but I wouldn't utter that out loud. I would take that as an opportunity to say, let's sit down and I'll show you how it's something different to that. And I'll show you how those pieces are really important parts of the puzzle to get up to the top right, innovating and solving areas. You have to have a social element in order to unlock the real business element as well. And it's about having that sort of humanity at work. It sounds a bit highfalutin, but that's how I see it. Viva Engage it can so often be the humanity at work, right? Matt, I did see you nodding a couple of times there. I just wondered if there's anything you wanted to add on this maturity level model.
No, I think a couple of things. I think one is that it is really powerful when you go and explain to senior leaders, when, as I was as a community manager, dragged into the C-suite, the exec team, to explain why we had a pets group on Yammer. And I can see it in the chat, why are people wasting their time on Yammer? And I think it was a really nice way to be able to say, well, we need to bring people into the platform. We need to give them that personal value so that we can get to business value, kind of reflecting on the same thing, that if you didn't have social conversations at the beginning of meetings, they'd be horrendously dull and no one would want to go to meetings. So it's the same kind of concept there. I think the other thing that it's really powerful for is that it works not only at an organizational level, but you can sort of think, is this where my community is as well, or where am I as an individual? So you can use it in those different contexts, I guess.
I'd love to hear maybe, and with very little context, I'd love to just do a little experiment and see if people share in the chat. So where would you say your Viva Engage network is at currently? Are you in an adoption phase where the focus is on content and how can we get more people in there? And then user engagement, where it's about, okay, we've got some content and we want people to engage more in there? Or are you feeling like you're looking at, we're really sort of driving connection, we're breaking down silos and that connecting phase of building more of a networked organization? Are you seeing people sharing information and building that knowledge network really, really actively? And especially I'm interested to know if people have got concrete examples of teams and people solving problems or driving innovation from your Viva Engage network. Just drop in 1 or 2 words in the chat with your thoughts on where you're at currently. Be interesting to see. Yeah, a few of you going, oh, platform adoption. Yeah.
Yes, so I'm one of those people in the internal comms team who tries to regularly post on our existing channel. It's trying to get colleagues to just jump in and post. It doesn't necessarily need to have a great big Oasis plan to launch this thing. It can just start with people just actively posting, and then getting those likes and getting those sort of interactions going. But I think to obviously convince everyone that the value of this internal social media channel is so huge, I'm doing a little scoping report and stuff, and it's just certain figures and things that have already come up from a few posts that I've put on there. I'm a bit tentative because people have kind of said, oh, why would you want to do that? We're not sure what we're doing. And I said, well, it's there. Why are we not using it as a platform? It's the best way to try and gauge what the outcome is, what the feeling is, kind of thing. So yeah, I'm quite sort of when I used to work at my previous place, I was one of the people that started posting very regularly during the pandemic, and it was the first thing that we set up was a pet community, and it just flew from there. And it's the small things that we miss during from not being in the office to start off the ball rolling, if that makes sense. And that's where I am at the moment. So I'm not sure how it's going to go, but it's really been useful to have these analytics and data, which I'm going to be presenting later on this afternoon.
It's great. I think you're right. It is some of the little things. I've certainly seen communities grow where just only one leader, and I had a conversation with one leader, and they just literally would celebrate people's birthdays and long service. And then the engagement just started to go up and up and up. And then other leaders saw that, started to do it. You've mentioned someone, you've taken a photo of the long service, they all jump in to sort of see it. And then before you know it, you're starting to get this groundswell of appreciation. Yeah.
I just saw Peter's comment and a couple of others in the chat about it depends, things vary, and that's a really important point in this. You'd have a level of maturity for your overall network, but within that, different communities will be at very different stages of maturity, and so that's an important piece. And it ties back to Gemma, when you were mentioning earlier about the importance of community management, whether that's a formal role or it's sort of informally wrapped into other people's activities. But people who are leading communities, not necessarily leaders in hierarchical terms, but people who are leading the development of communities, need to be conscious of what level of maturity are we at here. If you're at the platform adoption phase, then you need to think about, how do I get to user engagement, rather than the expectation often is, well, we've launched a community, why aren't people innovating in here yet? Why aren't they solving all these problems? It's a journey. And 5 years got mentioned earlier, and I think like culture shift, 5 years is a sound time frame to put around that sort of culture shift. But within that, you can have kind of small experimental areas and little pockets of rapid advancement, and you can really sort of see that in a Viva Engage network if you have particular communities that are buzzing, and what lessons can we take from them. So one of the things I used to love using Swoop was the ability to, in a couple of clicks, see that list of top performing communities and go and engage with them and see what were they doing, and getting their community leaders to showcase what they were doing to other people. And you can build that organic kind of development and the lifting up of maturity by using the people that are already at more advanced levels to help them tell the story and help them teach others how to get there. So
I'm going to move on to the next slide, Pete. I think you're going to talk about this one, because we are with about 13 minutes left, and I know you want to hear.
So I'm really keen just to throw the mic to Paul. Gemma, I don't know if you just want to sort of introduce the winners. Some of your customers over in North America are on here.
Yes. So these are our thriving communities. So this is what we've been speaking about. So for the US, we had the Home Depot, Real Foundations and Progressive. For Europe, Pete?
Yeah, Greco, who Paul is going to speak in just a second. Christian Aid, we've had Peter Berry active in the chat there and sharing a few thoughts. Thanks, Peter, for being here today. Christian Aid ranked 2nd in the world for small organisations, and Greco in the top 3 for medium-sized, and then Schneider Electric there. So I don't know if anyone from Schneider Electric is on the call, but very large organisation there, and they actually have, out of all of the thriving communities worldwide in our data set, it was a Schneider Electric community that was ranked #1 in the world. So interesting to see there. But Paul, I know you're on here. We'd love you to come off mute and share a bit. We've got a case study from Greco in the benchmarking report. Would you be able to give sort of a summary of that case study and how you've kind of nurtured, particularly through leadership activity, your community activity?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pete, and hi everyone. Yes, we've had a really nice outcome in one of our communities whereby one of our regional MDs who looks after the EMEA region wanted to change the way that he engaged with the people in his division, and he didn't want to just go down the route of a town hall. He wanted to do something more collaborative and was really interested in using Engage, but wasn't too sure about using Engage. He wasn't particularly confident, so we gave him a couple of Engage 101 sessions and showed him the basics, and then he jumped into his first post and immediately got a really great response from his organization, to the point where he just become self-sufficient overnight. He loved the reactions and the engagement that he got from that post, and it just gave him the appetite to do more. So he moved very quickly from an MD who was just sort of dipping his toe into Engage in the hope that he might get some likes and some comments, into regularly posting, and he's now into he'll head out to one of the regions in EMEA, and he'll quite happily grab a selfie with a gang of guys, or he did a selfie the other day from within a car. It was a non-stationary car, hasten to add, and this kind of human approach to comms has landed really well in that part of the business. They really appreciate the fact that this MD is taking the time out to talk to them, but also just the very human way in which he's writing his posts. You can tell it's anyone who knows this particular individual. You can tell the posts are by him. They're not ghostwritten. They're from the heart. They have the odd typo in. He writes as he speaks, and it's just really resonated. And then good for this chap. His community's ranked really highly in the benchmarking that we're talking about today, which is fantastic. And when I told him about that, he was really bowled over. I don't think he was expecting anything like that. He could see the impact he was having on Engage, but he didn't think it would be anything big enough to warrant a mention on a report somewhere. So he was very happy.
It's a great story, right? And I think that final point you make is really important. Is a lot of the time leaders push back on stuff when you really scratch at their rationale. There's a lot of fear wrapped up into it, right? And one of the things that I think is important to do is to give leaders feedback when they're doing a good job. And very often they don't actually realize the impact that they're having. We see it time and again that leaders don't understand the impact that they have, but they have a massive impact on, particularly on developing a culture of open communication in a channel like Viva Engage. And so if they're a little bit wary of doing it, it's easy for them to push back and say, oh, I don't have the time, or something like that, a flippant line. But then to your point, Paul, people in that division they're not just appreciating the communication, they're appreciating the fact that he's taking the time to communicate and to do it himself and to be authentic about it.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing that he's been really good at, which has helped, is he quite quickly discovered the at mention feature, and many of his direct reports were also hesitant about Engage, but he has just lobbed them in at the deep end by at mentioning people left, right and center and dragging them into the conversation. And they can either, you know, look silly and ignore it, or they can come into the chat and participate. And slowly but surely he's dragging them all with him, which is really great to see. And we're hoping that other leaders, you know, other MDs from other regions are kind of watching from the sidelines, and their competitive nature will kick in, and let's see some more of these doing the same is the dream.
Mm.
Brilliant. My Teams just went funny. This is great. I've just popped something in the chat to talk about exactly to Paul's point. It's just about what something. Oh, I think someone just needs to unmute. Never underestimate how far a like or a thank you can go, and I've seen it, you know, and I do think it is just taking that time. And I do think as well, I think a lot of senior leaders, and I used to hear it, like I've posted and not many people are interacting, or they're not reading it. It does take time to just build up that online reputation. It doesn't happen overnight, but actually you will probably be amazed that when somebody sees that the senior leaders are taking time out to reach out to a highly captivated audience, then it's amazing. Can you see my screen? Because I think it's just...
No, I've just started sharing because we were getting a strange message, so I'm hoping everyone can...
It's new teams. Yeah, so that's, I think, what we've got 5 minutes left, so we'll wrap up. I think Pete's taken control of the...
Yeah, we were getting a funny view there. So can I just get a thumbs up from everyone that you can see my screen? Okay, great.
Thanks, Pete.
Because this is an important piece. For those of you that aren't yet registered, I know that I can see a fair few people on this call that are registered. On December 6th, we've got the Viva Engage Festival coming up. So this will be the 3rd year of the Viva Engage Festival. First year it was called the AMER Festival. Last year it was called the AMER and Viva Engage Festival. And so I'm really pleased that this year it's much simpler. It's the Viva Engage Festival. So that naming journey is well underway. Tim, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to jump in before we close, and I promise that no one in Swoop asked me to say this, but for those of you that haven't looked at the report, download the report and read it. It's very good. For me, not only was it good to see the numbers of how I'm comparing with the industry, or industry averages, but the case studies that are in there. For every score that says, if you need to work on this, there's like 3 or 4 case studies. And right now it's goal planning time for me and my company. And I was able to go through and find out like 4 campaigns I could do real easily, build that in my goal setting. And some of these are like zero cost. Like if you're looking for examples, if you're hoping to get examples from this call, you can do a campaign that's as simple as what I like best about working at this company is, and just have people write and fill that in. And some places might need some enticements. Say if you participate, we'll enter you to win 1 of 3 gift cards for whatever. But something like that is I mean, there's not real heavy lift to do it, but to get people to start talking about what they like about working at the company can really be a big positive experience and get more people on the platform. So anyways, really good case studies in there, and they're helping me a lot. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you,
fantastic. Tim. Fantastic. I've just dropped in the chat a link to download the report, as well as the QR code on screen. And let's pop a link to the festivals in the chat too, for those of you that don't have a mobile or the ability to read that QR code swiftly. So yeah, Viva Engage Festival, amazing lineup of speakers. Please register, come along. Fantastic, Enrico. We look forward to seeing you there. And then the next piece is Gemma. Do you want to talk about this? I'm sorry, I've got a bad cold. And before the session, I said to Gemma, can you lead this? I'm not going to talk much, I think. But then I've just get too overexcited, so I'll go quiet now.
Good. It's all good. Yeah, so part of the Viva Engage Festival is that we like to do a big shout out for the Viva Engage Community Champion. And so these are the people, if you've got those community champions within your communities that are really driving those communities, that have maybe been a bit of a disruptor, very passionate, then please vote for them, nominate them, and then they get a certificate to say that they are a Community Champion Award. And I think this year we're going to be, the winner will be able to donate money to a chosen charity. So definitely get your nomination in. It's just a form that you need to complete, but we would love to see, we've already got about 30, I think, nominations in. We would love to see more, because I do think it's these people that really drive those communities, and then make them such a success. So definitely shout out to your community champions. And then next slide. Thank you. That's it. So look at that timing. So we've got lots of so much chat going on. It's been amazing, and just thank you for all contributing, coming off mute. I just think these webinars are so successful when everybody can take something away. Please, if you're not, you can find us on LinkedIn. We are happy to help. Take a look at the Swoop Analytics website. We do free masterclasses. We have lots of case studies of examples on Viva Engage, Workplace by Meta. We also do expert talks, and then we just love chatting and meeting you all and talking to you all. So thank you so much. For those of you in North America, have a fantastic Thanksgiving on Thursday. Enjoy the rest of your week, and then keep in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.